So let me say that. Let me say this about the idea, like I talked about earlier, about fixing them. This idea that somehow that Muslims have a responsibility, or that the global South generally has any sort of responsibility to save so-called Western civilization from itself. No, you don't. That's not your job at all. That's not your job at all. It was never your job. Da'wah is an obligation to convey the message. That's all. You make the truth available. You say what needs to be said. That's a duty. That is the only duty. You're not responsible for the result. You're not responsible for transforming an anti-civilization into an actual civilization. You're not responsible for managing their civilizational decline in a way that will keep them comfortable and make yourself comfortable. No, that's not your job description. The witness delivers the testimony. That's all we do. The witness does not manage the outcome of the trial. And I say this specifically because I see Muslims, sincere Muslims, I believe to be well-intentioned Muslims, investing enormous amounts of energy in the project of making themselves comprehensible to the Westerners, comprehensible to Americans, explaining Islam in a way that resonates with liberal values, so-called, framing Islamic positions in the vocabulary of Western human rights, softening, translating, modifying, making it more palatable for them. And the underlying assumption is always, if we can just make them understand us, then things will get better. No, they understand you already. They understand you already. That is not the problem. The problem is what the Quran already told you is the problem. So understand, your energy is not unlimited. Your time is not unlimited. Your community's resources, human resources, intellectual and financial resources, this is not unlimited. Every hour that you spend trying to make yourself likable to that so-called civilization, when anyway that civilization so-called is already in terminal decline as it is, that is an hour that you did not spend building the alternative, building the institutions, building the epistemological infrastructure that all of our community can use, building the economic sovereignty that we need, building the educational frameworks. You understand me? Building the conditions under which the next generation of Muslims will think, will live and will think from Islamic foundations. Build it from Islamic foundations, not from borrowing from the foundations of that visibly collapsing so-called civilization. That's the work that you should be involved in. And it's work that you're not going to get done while you're busy performing being a moderate to an audience that's never going to be satisfied anyway. Like I said before, I speak to you as a Muslim, and I speak to you as someone who comes from the West, who came from out of the West with Western experience, say. These are both simultaneously true, and I don't separate them. But most fundamentally, I'm speaking to you again as a witness. And what I mean by that is something very specific. There is going to be a day. There is going to be a day, and every single person who hears me, in whatever level of their consciousness is still connected to their fitrah, they know that this is true. There is going to be a day when all of this is accounted for. Every choice, every compromise, every alignment, every capitulation. You understand me? Every moment that you knew the truth and looked away from the truth or denied it. Every time you had an Islamic framework available to you and you still chose the Western framework because it was more comfortable, because it was more socially acceptable, because it was less likely to cost you something in this dunya if you just adopted their ways. That day is coming. And I'm telling you about it from this side of that day, not as a threat, but as a reminder and as a testimony. Because how will it look on that day that you had the Quran? Right? That you had 1400 years of the most sophisticated, divinely grounded tradition in human history. You had the analytical tools. You had the moral framework that was available to you. The epistemological foundations were available to you. That everything you needed to understand this world clearly and navigate this world successfully, correctly, all of that was available to you, and you set it aside because a civilization of 350 years convinced you that its way of thinking was actually superior, that their values and their standards were superior. I mean, how will it look that you have been given the truth? You were given the truth, alhamdulillah, the truth of Islam, but you were more concerned with how that truth would appear to people who hate the truth, coming from a so-called civilization that's dedicated to fighting the truth. I'm telling you, this is the most important thing that you need to consider if you're over there in the diaspora, if you're over there in the West. That witness function, that same thing that I talked about throughout this lecture, being a shaheed, someone who, as a witness, you remove yourself from the equation and you describe what actually is. That function exists precisely for this purpose, not to make anyone feel good, not to perform solidarity with anyone, not to be useful to this faction or that faction, Not to try to benefit yourself, but so that you can say before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I saw it and I named it and I told the truth about it, whatever it is. That's all that a witness can do. The rest is between you and your Creator. And what I have seen and what I am naming is this: the most colonized minds on earth right now are not in the formerly colonized world. They are in the diaspora. They're in the West. They're in America. Among the people who have the most access to the truth, our own brothers and sisters, who have the most access to the truth, but also the most sophisticated infrastructure for distorting the truth. They're living under that. Muslims who have their deen, alhamdulillah, but have had, to one degree or another, their comprehension of their deen corroded from the inside by the acid of Western thinking. You have the fitrah, alhamdulillah, but to one degree or another, you are numbed from your fitrah by the bombardment of a civilization that profits from numbing your fitrah. You understand me? I see us and I see them. And I see that many of you don't know which one you are.